Our fiscal situation is a 350-pound, 2-pack-a-day smoker on the ICU table.
The U.S. federal budget is on an unsustainable path.
We're going to be broke really quickly unless we get serious about dealing with our spending issues.
There's no shortage of voices sounding the alarm about the national debt. America's borrowing levels are currently the same size as the entire economy and are expected to skyrocket from here. That's because the U.S. spends way more than it brings in and then borrows to cover that deficit.
There's plenty of debate on how to close that gap. Raise taxes, cut spending, a combination of both. No doubt any solution demands hard choices. But what are the actual consequences if the deficit gets out of control?
I often liken this to the invisible dog fence, where you really don't want to hit it, but you won't know until you do. And it seems like the U.S. is almost intent on finding out where that tipping point is.
Here, we'll explore not how to fix the deficit, but to figure out what could happen if we don't. We'll focus on 3 key areas: the potential market fallout, economic ripple effects, and international implications. Even though debt has been central to America since 1776, we haven't yet seen a tipping point. For much of the nation's history, the U.S. tried to balance the budget. That changed toward the end of the 20th century.
1991, 1990 were periods when there was a lot of uncertainty about our economy. I remember I was at that time co-senior partner at Goldman Sachs, and a lot of our clients were very uncertain of what was going to happen, and deficits played a big role in that.
This is Robert Rubin. He advised Bill Clinton on his presidential campaign, The Transition, and later joined the administration. He ultimately served as the 70th Treasury Secretary.
I'll never forget, we had a meeting of the economic team, and at some point he looked at us and he said, "This is a threshold issue. It's going to be difficult politically, but this is what we have to do." And that is indeed what we did.
Tonight at midnight, America puts an end to 3 decades of deficits and launches a new era of balanced budgets and surpluses.
It was the first time since 1969, but the surplus was short-lived. Since then, the U.S. has had several rounds of tax cuts, multiple expensive wars, a financial crisis, and a pandemic, all contributing to an historic fiscal hole.
It's very, very roughly about 1/3 from tax cuts, 1/3 from spending increases, and 1/3 from emergencies. Those emergencies were the right time to borrow, the other 2, not so much.
Kent Smetter's team at Wharton creates models that show how policy changes impact the federal budget.
What does the model tell you in real time about the current state of our deficit?
Fiscal policy is not sustainable. The economy essentially blows up. There's so much debt under current law that fixed income markets, bond markets will collapse.
Smetter's model shows that collapse could happen within 20 years.
If Congress really doesn't get its act together and try to figure out some grand bargain that solves this problem, then there's only one mathematical way of getting out of this, and that is for some type of default to happen.
A default is when a borrower can't make payments on a debt, but that's unlikely to happen to America because we have ways to get around it.
The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that.
If you print bonds in your own currency, what happens to the currency is can be a question, because you don't default.
We just cranked up the printing press. That now means there are more dollars in the economy that are chasing the same amount of goods and services. That's where inflation comes from. And that's what we've seen throughout history of other countries that have struggled with high debt.
What do you think the likelihood is that the U.S. does experience a crisis related to its deficit or debt levels?
I think that there's more than a 50% chance that in 3 years, give or take a year or two, that we will experience a trauma if we don't deal with this well.
Ray Dalio has been a global macro investor for 50 years, known for starting Bridgewater Associates. He's been concerned about government debt levels since the 2008 financial crisis.
I think of myself being very much like a doctor. I watch the plaque build up in the system. I always said it was unhealthy, but I have not said before that the supply-demand picture is a very serious picture as it is now.
That's because Dalio has studied how countries go broke and says his research across centuries found that there are cycles that have led to big debt bubbles and busts, and he's deeply concerned about what he sees.
The supply that's going to be produced by deficits is greater than the demand for that debt. Like watching somebody having a circulatory system condition, you can measure those things. It's getting very severe.
To raise money and help pay for the growing deficit, the U.S. government issues and sells treasuries. When investors start getting jittery about too much debt flooding the markets and the risk of inflation, they'll insist they get paid even higher rates to buy treasuries. Ed Yardeni first started noticing this behavior in the 80s, a response to the raging inflation from the prior decade.
There was a lot of fear among investors that they could get burned again. And as a result of that, I coined the phrase bond vigilantes with the notion that if the Fed and the government weren't going to be responsible, weren't going to be the sheriffs in town to manage the economy in a way that would keep inflation down, that the bond vigilantes would do it.